Hi, and welcome back to 50 years ago this month. We're going to be talking today about the Billboard Hot 100 chart of May 16th, 1970.
Yeah, May 16th, yeah.
Okay, before we actually get into talking about the songs, the hits of the day, I'd like to talk a little bit about the context this was all taking place in. And of course, May 1970 is a time that will mean a lot of people to the people who lived at that time, because it was actually a very tragic time for our country. Steve, maybe you could give us a little bit of the historical background.
Yeah, thanks. Looking back at May 1970, so many things really point to what happened in both Kent, Ohio, and in Jackson, Mississippi, regarding student protests and how. So it's May 4th, right? It's May 4th, 1970, anti-war demonstration on the campus of Kent State University. One of many. Things had been boiling at Kent State for quite a while, as they had really across the country. National Guard troops opened fire, live ammunition on student protesters, killing 4 and injuring several more. And then a few days later, actually, in Jackson, Mississippi, a similar kind of incident where you had student protests and police opened fire and kill 2 students at Jackson State. It was just a terrible month, and so many things had pointed to the fact that the opposition to Vietnam was, was reaching a kind of boiling point. The reaction, of course, right, to Kent State was quite notable. Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew, the president and vice president, for example, were frankly almost dismissive of the student tragedy, backing the authority, backing of the National Guard or the police, and also suggesting I think on some level that the students kind of had it coming. And so,
well, I don't think that attitude was restricted to the White House. I think there was a widespread sentiment that they've been asking for it for a long time. Really, what were they expecting? They provoked it. And they had the ROTC building at the Kent State campus had been burned down.
That's right.
Before, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Middle America looked at these events and said, well, those kids had to be stopped at some point.
Yeah.
So the reaction that a lot of us in our generation have when we think of Kent State as being a terrible point at which lines were clearly crossed, it was not a sentiment that was widely spread. But of course,
that's right.
Neil Young clearly felt that a line had been crossed and responded with his song "Ohio," which was immediately and enthusiastically embraced by the band, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and they got that right out.
That's right. Yeah. It's
so it will be in one of our upcoming hit shows.
It definitely will. I think we bring up this political and social context initially because I think it's important, because these are songs that people would be listening to on the radio, that kind of thing. Just again, a couple of weeks after all this goes down, and some of the songs, well, I think it's quite striking actually. What some of the songs, the messages, of some of the songs, and so that we wanted to at least establish that context initially. And so, as we think about the top 10, the top 10 from mid-May of 1970. At number 1 is the Canadian group Guess Who and their American Woman, No Sugar Tonight. Double A side single. At number 2, Jackson 5's the ABC. Ides of March out of Chicago were at number 3 with Vehicle. The Beatles hymn, this massive hit McCartney penned, Let It Be, is at number 4. Number 5 are the folk duo of Simon and Garfunkel, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, with Cecilia. And so, Dave, you got a couple thoughts about Cecilia?
Okay, this week Cecilia is at number 5. It will peak at 4 in the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Third single that was released from the Bridge Over Troubled Water. And it was interesting for a number of reasons. One being that it most obviously made reference to sex in the afternoon. And Simon talks about a Vietnam vet coming back a few months later. And when they heard Cecilia, it was a sign for the guys in Vietnam. Things are opening up back home. If you can have a hit with a song that talks about making love in the afternoon, then the Moors are listening somewhat. So
that's absolutely right.
Yeah. A sign of the sexual revolution actually starting to loosen up. It's a song I think that could not have been played on the radio 3 years earlier.
I think I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I think it is actually in its own way a kind of slightly subversive song. It's also one of the more upbeat numbers that they ever record together. And even with
I guess the rhythm, the whole rhythm thing started off. They were at a party with some friends and just started pounding on a piano bench and got this rhythm thing going, and somebody recorded it on a tape recorder. And Simon came into the studio and with his producer, they sliced about a minute long, a little over a minute section of this, what they'd been playing at the party, and just looped it. And that was the rhythm for the thing. In addition to some other things, some random xylophone stuff from some. They were dropping drumsticks on the parquet floor, and it's just experimental.
It is. There is a certain kind of looseness to the song that is, and a lot of their stuff is really highly produced, if not even overproduced. There's something about this song that does seem kind of loose and breezy. And when you talk about it starting as a kind of jam session, I think it really comes across. And so, so we have Cecilia at number 5. At number 6.
Well, just a couple more things before we go on. Stephen Colbert was interviewing Simon a few years back and asked, why would you need to get up to wash your face after a lovemaking? Simon said, well, I wrote it in the 60s. I really can't remember what I was thinking. But so in addition to the quite open references to sex, there were some slightly more subtle ones, but Cecilia is Saint Cecilia, the patron saint of music. So on this other level, maybe Simon was talking about difficulties, writer's block, dry spells, how the muse can be such a fickle mistress. So there's that as well. There's
a certain kind of joyousness to the song that again is unusual. And again, a reminder that they're accompanying our conversations will be a playlist, and so you can, if you're reasonably unfamiliar with Cecilia, you haven't heard it for a while, check out the playlist and you can hear it for yourself. At number 6 is Norman Greenbaum's, the one-hit wonder of all time, Spear in the Sky. Very, it's a peculiar song on a number of levels, but a massive hit for Greenbaum. And then at number 7 is the Ray Stevens, I guess, classic, is Everything Is Beautiful. Stevens is for me, Stevens is a bit of a problematic figure. There's no question that that Everything Is Beautiful is it's a powerful song. It's very much a kind of song of the time. It's an almost anthemic quality. There's a gospel nature to it and all that, but it's very inclusive, right? It's the idea that that God loves everyone, and no matter your color of your skin, and this is all actually referenced in the song, and it starts off again with the kind of children's choir. I think many people are familiar with the song, and again, if you're not, go to the playlist and listen to it. But Stevens himself is actually quite well known for some of his right-wing political views. I mean, he was a kind of novelty song artist. Among his hits from the top 10 were songs like Ahab the Arab, Guitar Zan, Misty, which is a kind of recast of a classic tune. And of course, then from '74, the Streak, which look at that. It was, he was sort of the, Mr. Novelty record, but he also had a kind of conservative streak that came to the fore in his later years. And so for me, there's a kind of disconnect between Everything Is Beautiful and the Ray Stevens, the public persona of Ray Stevens in later years.
Well, Ray Stevens was also the explorer that discovered Branson, Missouri, right?
He's one of the first people to that's right. And that Branson thing is interesting, right? A kind of redneck Las Vegas, but right. So Stevens is amongst the first people to perform and to build a theater and these kinds of things. And Branson, in the 80s, became this important kind of middle class destination. It's Steve. The song is very much of the time, right? Again, you can imagine the turmoil that is in the United States at this point. And to hear this song was, I think, soothing for many people. I mean, it's really a kind of a beautiful song. I'm not trying to disparage the tune, but there is, again, for me, I can't get away from it. There's a kind of disconnect between Stevens and the songwriter and Stevens and the kind of public persona, which I guess is, he's an artist, and so he's due his direction and that kind of thing. But a kind of peculiar tune. And it eventually, of course, peaks at number 1, and it's really a kind of worldwide smash. So Everything Is Beautiful at number 7. At number 8 is a song that, I'll be honest, I was pretty unfamiliar with. By pretty unfamiliar with, I mean by completely unfamiliar with, and that's Tyrone Davis's Turn Back the Hands of Time. Davis had a lot of hits, particularly on the R&B chart. He had 13 hits, top 10 hits on the R&B chart. But most likely, I think, Turn Back the Hands of Time was his biggest sort of crossover hit. And one of the things that makes Davis interesting, a couple things. One is that he recorded on the Atlantic label. And the Atlantic label was very tied to soul. The Atlantic label, founded by Ahmet Ertegun, was always very in tune what was happening in the R&B world. And so there is a kind of, the fact that he was on the Atlantic label, I think, is a kind of marked distinction. The other thing about Davis is that his story is the story of so many African Americans in the 20th century, is that he grew up in Mississippi as a kid. And then his dad, looking for work and looking to escape the South, moved the family to Saginaw, Michigan, and so this is part of the kind of great migration that African Americans made particularly in the early to mid 20th century, where hundreds of thousands of blacks just left the South for a variety of reasons, and they found then work and a kind of place in the industrial Midwest in particular. From there, then Davis goes on to Detroit and then later to Chicago. But, you know, his story in some ways is actually kind of, I think on some level, the story of African Americans in the 20th century in terms of leaving the South, but still sort of feeling a kind of connection to the South. And so a very important singer, particularly in rhythm and blues. And he had a very long career. Passed away in 2004, but he charted for over 20 years. So Tyrone Davis has turned back the hands of time. At number 9 is, well, this double A. It's by CCR. Dave's gonna talk about it a little bit, but it's Up Around the Bend and Run Through the Jungle at number 9.
Yeah, it's really an incredible single when you think about it. Through the Jungle's the B-side. Wow.
Yeah.
Starting with Up Around the Bend, this was a song that Fogerty wrote and recorded just days before the band's 1970 European tour. And it's very, very upbeat, like all CCR stuff, just a sweet, short, little rocky piece.
Oh, yeah.
And the single's at number 9 this week, but it will peak at number 4. And both songs, of course, are on the 5th studio album of the group, Cosmo's Factory.
Oh, yeah.
People point to as kind of being the peak of their
it's
activity.
incredible. It's an incredible album. Yeah, Cosmos, yeah.
And this is the 6th single of theirs to reach the top 10. They were just huge back in the late 60s, early 70s, and rightly so. It's just a powerhouse. Certified platinum, of course, at some point. And the band is interesting these days because it was used by Pete Buttigieg, campaign stuff. Probably a reference to being a mayor of South Bend, Indiana. But he also said it came from his childhood. When they were driving in his dad's car, there was one tape in there from the time that he got a tape deck to the time that the car just stopped working, and that was Cosmo's Factory. So he said as a kid, he heard this song a few hundred times.
Oh, yeah.
Again and again. Okay, Run Through the Jungle, of course, this is a song that, well, both of these songs are used extensively in soundtracks for films, television.
They're everywhere.
Games. But Run Through the Jungle you see most often in the context of the Vietnam War, anti-war protests and that sort of thing. But Fogerty says he didn't actually write it as an anti-war song. He wrote it to talk about the proliferation of guns in America. He read an article that there was a gun for every man, woman, and child in America, and he just found that amazing. So he thought, well, we're living in a jungle here. And I think there's even a line in there talking about 200 million guns. And that's really what it's about.
But we recognize, though, that this thing comes out in 1970 at the height of the Vietnam War, and so there is the association is that most people make. Oh yeah, just it's obvious.
The images are certainly more Vietnam oriented.
Oh yeah,
an American street, and you think about like Platoon, where you actually have a guy running through the jungle. As part of the movie, a scene in the movie. And this is what you think about. So this is Tom Fogerty's favorite CCR song, by the way.
That leads to the whole Fogerty situation within CCR. This is John Fogerty is a famously dyspeptic individual. Nobody burnt as many bridges as John Fogerty. My God, right? That band, they were just at each other's throats, right, for years. Tom Fogerty, who actually starts the group, leaves the group, doesn't want it anymore. They sued each other. Famously, when they were inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, John Fogerty wouldn't play with them. John Fogerty just hated these guys. And it's amazing that they accomplished as much as they did, given the amount of discord in the band. It's the other thing about CCR is, again, they're a California band from San Francisco. They have a lot of sort of bayou illusions, not so much here, but in many of their songs. It's an interesting group, an important group. The other weird fact about CCR, right, is that they never had a #1 hit. That they had,
yeah, that's bizarre.
Ads of #2 hits, but never reached the top of the charts. Isn't that weird?
That's very strange. I would never have guessed that.
Yeah, so it's for me, Up Around the Bend is by far my favorite CCR song, but at #9 we have Up Around the Bend and Run Through the Jungle. Completing the top 10 then is a UK act, the Marmelade, in Reflections of My Life, a kind of syrupy number, very, very sentimental. And it was the only real hit that the Marmelade ever had in the United States, or frankly, really anywhere. It's very much a kind of, and again, encourage you, if you're unfamiliar with the song, doesn't ring a bell, I encourage you to go to the playlist and listen to it for yourself. It's, again, beyond sort of sentimental, there are lots of overdubs, lots of strings. It's very much a kind of studio piece. It's very unlikely that the Marmelade would have ever been able to recreate it on stage at any kind of level. The Marmelade bounced around really for almost 20 years, but this was their only kind of moment of success. I would just add, though, that in a song that's very much reflective about one's past and sentimental about the journey that one's been on, that if you would hear this song, right, after a newscast describing the events at Kent State, for example, Jackson State, it must have really pulled at the heartstrings. And so as you think about these songs in the top 10, several of them are, very kind of sentimental, some degree inclusive. And in the context of what was happening around the United States at this point, it's really quite stark and quite jarring in a way. All right, so it's mid-May of 1970. And in the rest of the top 40, there are a number of really interesting songs that we want to talk a little bit about. And the first we want to get to is the Man in Black, Johnny Cash, who in mid-May 1970, at #20, his single, What Is Truth, was being heard across the United States. What is truth? Now, Dave, you got a couple thoughts about this song and Cash in general.
Yeah, I actually, I remember this song on the radio. I was 9 years old, 10 years old. I loved it. I thought it was a great song. Johnny Cash wrote the song, saying it was released in February 1970. And it's in this week, it's at the #20 position. It peaked at #19. So, of course, the Billboard Hot Country chart, it peaked at #3. So it was quite successful. It was Cash's 12th top 40 song in the Hot 100. So the man just had an enduring career, basically right up until his death, but this is just kind of in the middle. Maybe a little bit before he just kind of disappears for a while because of drug problems and so on. But it's kind of an answer in a way to Okie from Muskogee, from Merle Haggard.
Yeah, it's interesting.
The damned hippies, basically, and how in mid-America we don't need those long hairs. Johnny Cash is saying they're asking important questions, and if they seem different than what we're used to our kids being, it's because they have different issues to deal with. And so this really fits into what's going on. And certainly Johnny Cash would have come down on the what the heck is going on side of the Kent State thing, as opposed to those kids were provoking it. So maybe maybe Merle Haggard would be with the president, and Johnny Cash with Neil Young.
He's, it's Cash. I mean, when you talk about the number of songs that Cash put on the pop charts, for example, this is in an era where there wasn't a lot of crossover between country and pop. And so I think Cash always had an audience, sort of outside sort of the Nashville scene. It's also the case, right, that Cash was unafraid. I mean, there's something about him that's fearless, and that's fearless throughout his career. I mean, this is also the era, right, where he's not only performing at prisons, but recording, at Folsom and at San Quentin. These albums are coming out roughly about the same time. And it's also the case that when Cash thought that an artist was important, he didn't give a crap what people in Nashville thought. And so it's right, it's Cash who really helps to, I don't know if he puts his arm around, he really gives a big boost to people like Bob Dylan. I think the link between Cash and Dylan is profound. It's their friendship was deep.
Well, I just think Johnny Cash was an all-around good guy, and he looked to help people. I think in a lot of ways he fostered Merle Haggard.
I think that's right. Yes.
Merle Haggard was at Folsom Prison as a prisoner.
As a prisoner.
When Johnny Cash came and gave his famous Folsom Prison concert. And that's when he decided he needed to clean up and fly straight, and he would be a country singer. That inspired him to his career.
I think that, if anything, I think Cash is really sort of undersold today. That just his influence. I mean, he was a remarkably important figure in music, all forms of music, for a long time. And I think culturally, he was a person, who was, his notion of standing up for what he believed was right, what you've alluded to already. He was really, again, fearless that's the word that comes to mind. He, even in his whole persona, right? I'm the man in black because I'm representing those who have been, beaten down, those who are ignored. If you feel like, the world has passed you by, that I'm with you. That he just took that on in a very, very powerful way. And I completely bought into it. I mean, from my perspective, Johnny Cash was an authentic individual, an authentic performer.
Oh, I think so too.
This is just
absolutely think he was the genuine article. And if you look at his variety show,
which is super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. He had at least as many pop and rock artists on that show as he did country.
That's absolutely right.
It's recorded in Nashville, I think.
Yeah.
But he brought a lot of pop acts in there. Mama Cass, Ronstadt, just the list goes on and on.
It goes on and on. Again, people he thought were interesting and important, and he wanted to help, give a kind of boost. He brought them on, and he didn't really care what people in Nashville thought. He didn't really care what people at the networks thought. It was, it was the Johnny Cash show. Again, I'd encourage people to seek out those clips from his show, which ran for a couple years in this era. Like Dave was saying, it's fantastic, and these duets are, some of them are just mind blowing. But particularly when he gets together with Dylan, it's really something. So yeah, Johnny Cash is the real deal.
Nashville Skyline was the album they did together, right? Bob Dylan and Johnny Cash. I think it's the Nashville Skyline.
That I'm not certain about. I'm not certain about how much Cash is on that album, but I mean, clearly it was recorded in Nashville and with a lot of Nashville session players.
And he wrote some extensive sleeve notes.
Okay, yeah. And Dylan talks. He talks about Cash. He talks about the kind of confidence that Cash's affirmation gave him, and you wouldn't think that Bob Dylan would need much of a pat on the back from anyone. But the fact that Johnny Cash was a fan gave Dylan enormous confidence, and it's just, I mean, to me, it's just a kind of.
Well, when was that? Was that post Newark or?
Yes, it would have been. right.
Maybe he needed a little bit of help at that
And maybe
point.
so. Yeah, and maybe he did. But Cash is someone that Dylan frankly revered. I mean, Cash was active. He starts recording in the early to mid 50s. I mean, Cash is all part of that Sun Studio crowd in Memphis, and Cash with the Tennessee Trio and all this kind of thing. He was part of the part of that whole circuit in the Deep South in the 50s. And Cash, of course, had his serious. He had tremendous struggles with substance abuse. I mean, just incredible. The fact that he carved out a life, any life at all, is really remarkable, given the
Well, it's due almost. I think there's no doubt that without June Carter, he would have died probably.
I think
well,
that's right.
earlier than he actually did.
I think that's right.
Ended up surviving her, but I don't think he would have become an old man.
Yeah, he wasn't. No, I think that's absolutely right. He wasn't destined for old age at his trajectory. I mean, I think June Carter did help redirect him. I don't think it's overstating to say she saved his life. I think that's probably right. Super. I mean, again, here we are going on about Johnny Cash, but he's a remarkably important figure. And again, I think today he's a little overlooked. But
if we end up doing a personality profile show for our channel here, he will definitely be one of the first people we look at, I think.
Oh, I think so too. Yeah, he's remarkably important in a number of areas. So number 20 is What Is Truth by Johnny Cash. A couple more songs from the top 40. At number 21 is a cover of the Box Tops hit, The Letter, by Joe Cocker. Joe Cocker's The Letter at number 21. Eventually, this song peaks at number 7. Joe Cocker is, his voice is extraordinary. Big-throated, gigantic man, physically a huge presence. You would never necessarily get this from listening to Cocker, but his stage presence, his persona was very awkward. He had, I don't know if awkward is the word, but he had an interesting way of delivering a song. And so he was easily mocked. He was easily aped. And John Belushi famously, in the earliest years of Saturday Night Live, John Belushi, who
did an incredible impression.
Did an incredible impression of Cocker. So there's something about Cocker that seems really quite awkward when you watch him. But he was a kind of force of nature on stage, and his voice was just, really extraordinary. He was an interpreter of songs. Famously, he interpreted a couple of Beatles songs. She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, A Little Help from My Friends.
Of course, A Little Help from My Friends. That was the Woodstock selection that got into the movie. And he's one of these artists whose careers got a huge boost from being in Woodstock.
That's absolutely right. A huge boost. I mean, it was the rocket fuel for his career. In this period, 1970, 1971, this is in the midst of his Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour across the world. It was this huge kind of hodgepodge of musicians and hangers-on, and it was a kind of traveling road show, led by among others Leon Russell. Leon Russell was his band leader, and quite frankly quite notorious in terms of debauchery. And Cocker himself had tremendous struggles with substance abuse and alcoholism, but what a voice! Just an incredible singer. I said real quick though, the letter itself is again it was a hit for a group from Memphis a couple of years earlier, a group called the Box Tops. And just want to mention the Box Tops real quickly. They were led by a 16-year-old Tennessean, a guy named Alex Chilton, who went on to some measure of success with big stars. So there's a kind of interesting kind of subplot when it comes to the letter. But Cocker was an amazing performer. Passed away a couple of years ago, but no one. But
if you listen to the Box Tops letter, it's almost inconceivable that you're hearing the voice of a 17, was he 17 at the time? I think
he's just a kid. Yeah.
When he recorded the song, it's such a powerhouse. And although the letter is definitely right up Cocker's aisle when it comes to the style of song, it's almost superfluous to cover that. Once you've heard the box version, you really don't need anything else.
I think, I would agree with you on one hand. I think you're right. But I do think that when Cocker interprets songs, he makes them his own. And so I almost see those songs as just almost kind of two different entities, much in the way when he sings a little help from my friends. I mean, it doesn't sound anything like
that's a completely different version.
It's completely different. And so there's something about the way he puts his own take on the songs. I guess one thing we should note about Cocker is he only hit the #1 spot once, and that was a duet in the early 80s with Jennifer Warren's
From the soundtrack to An Officer and a Gentleman.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so we have Joe Cocker at 21 with The Letter. A couple more. At number 23 is a Welsh singer, a guy by the name of Tom Jones, who comes in with a song called Daughter of Darkness. Daughter of Darkness is a kind of overwrought, kind of a lot of horns. Again, if you're unfamiliar with it, go to the playlist. Sort of high drama. Many of Jones's songs had this kind of element of, of drama and intrigue, and again, a little bit overwrought. But Jones is another figure from this era with an incredible voice, an incredible stage persona. And I'll give a little shout out to Tom Jones. He has been a fixture in show business for 60 years. He's almost 80 now. He still performs occasionally. Really, I think really an underrated performer. And much in the way that we were talking a minute ago about the Johnny Cash Friday show, I would strongly encourage you to, if you have any interest, to take a look at some of the clips from his show from the early 70s, Tom Jones's show called This Is Tom Jones. It was broadcast on ABC, and it was actually around the world at that time. Jones brought in everybody.
We will put a link to one of those down below. It really is worth watching.
For sure.
Yeah. He had a variety show and also had all sorts of stuff. What was the name of the duet album that he did? Reload? Was that right?
That rings a bell. And that was
early 2000s.
Yes, that was in a way he sort of was reinventing himself with these duets. A lot of them were mixed for dance music too. But yeah, I mean, Jones has been around forever. I guess he had hits with things like top 10 hits like She's a Lady, Not Unusual, What's New Pussycat. Again, I don't know. Delilah. But I would just encourage you the duets on This Is Tom Jones. When he sings with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, for example, which is the strangest pairing of all time until you hear Long Time Gone. It's like, oh my God, it's an extraordinary thing. And so Tom Jones at 23, I don't know. It's just, there's something about him that has always appealed to me. And so quite a figure and still with us. One other song that we wanted to get to is from a very different kind of performer, but somebody who was very much of the moment. So if it's the early 70s, Melanie is, everybody knows Melanie, and Melanie at 39 has a song called Lay Down Candles in the Rain, which she performs with the Edwin Hawkins Singers. Dave, you want to talk a little bit about Melanie in this song?
Well, this was actually her first hit in the U.S. She wrote it after performing at Woodstock. She was one of only 3 solo women acts. So, Steve, who were the other 2?
The only three solo female acts at Woodstock, as I'm trying to
Stall for time.
Well, I'm just not sure. Off the top of my head.
Well, to be honest, one of them is Janis Joplin, and I would not have considered her a solo act. I think
How is she a solo act?
I thought she was there with Big Brother.
Well, even if, yeah, I'm sure she was billed solo. So, okay, fair enough. Okay, so Janis Joplin, was the other one a folk act maybe?
Yes, yeah. So you're getting there.
Oh my God. Joni Mitchell wasn't there. Joan Baez.
Yeah, very good.
Ah.
So we have them. Those are the three. Clearly, like many performers at Woodstock, she was incredibly moved by her experience, and the song that she wrote about it, this "Lay Down, Candles in the Rain," was an attempt to process that and to kind of celebrate her experience there. The "Candles in the Rain" referred to the flames that she saw in the audience from candles or lighter matches that they were holding up there. And when a few 100,000 people do that, it's kind of impressive. Because she had semi-religious feelings about that experience, she kind of wanted to turn it into a gospel thing. And that's why she did the Edwin Hawkins Singers. And it's just an incredible anthem. So there's that, and she went on to do a number of other delightful songs. But this was her first hit.
This is her first hit, yeah. Just real quick.
In America, she was already well known in Europe. Had done some touring there, but this is her first.
And it makes, and again, we're not Woodstock experts. It does make you wonder how she got that gig. I mean, I'm sure that everybody, when she came up on stage, asked the question, "Who is this?" But the other thing about this, real quickly, is that the Edwin Hawkins singers, the background singers, they had a hit earlier, maybe a year before, with "Oh Happy Day," and so in a way, in 1970, the Edwin Hawkins singers on that song, that probably generated. People, who's Melanie? Oh, the Edwin Hawkins singers. I think they would have had some name recognition.
By the way, she also played at the Isle of Wight Festival.
Yeah.
And she was introduced there by Keith Moon.
Yeah.
And Steve, yes.
Yeah.
4 standing ovations at that festival. So
no,
she's quite an impressive, powerful singer. Has a unique voice. So I think she's quite a presence live.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that there was something about Melanie, sort of the zeitgeist. She's just, I don't know if a Melanie could work today, maybe, but she certainly was sort of the right person, right time. There's something about her and about her way she came across that just seemed very much in this moment. And so I think people embraced her. I think it was people just had such affection for her for so many years. And so, yeah, so there we go. Melanie with "Lay Down Candles in the Rain" at number 39. Well, Dave, you got any last thoughts here as we think about sort of mid-May 1970?
Well, no, not so much about that. What are you thinking?
Well, I'm just thinking as we move into the summer of 1970, that certainly in the United States, I think there was it was just such a increasingly bleak time. I think that the war was rolling relentlessly on, and also I think that for many people, the war had kind of come to the United States, had come home, and even no matter where you were politically, right. The events on campus were disturbing. And I just think that there was something about 1970 that was really unsettling. And I don't know that Nixon was doing much to calm the waters at this point. It's just, I guess as we think about, as we leave this, I would just emphasize the amount of turmoil and bleakness and darkness there was in the United States in this.
Well, it is conceivably the time before now, before our current time, that was most divisive in the American history until now.
I think that's right.
I think in the period between, we've had our disagreements and so on, and there's always been parties and there's always been left and right. But I think it was really coming to a head back then. So maybe the 20th century, the single most divisive time.
I would tend to agree there, absolutely. And I think any deep dive into 1970 is, frankly, it's just kind of chilling, just to hear the kind of rhetoric coming out of all sorts of places regarding protests and protesters, and then to see it actually carried out on campuses and stuff. It's just, it's an unsettling time. So we again encourage you to comment and to subscribe below. And
subscribe here. Subscribe right over here, and over here is another one of our videos from this series.
There we go.
And here you have the playlist of the songs that we talked about today.
Yeah, and the playlist, we think the playlists are particularly important because undoubtedly we're talking about some things that you might be unfamiliar with. And in many cases, we've been a little bit unfamiliar with them as well. And so it's a great way to sort of get up to speed with all this. So great visiting with you, Dave. Enjoyed it very much. And
yes, as always.
We'll talk to you soon.
We'll see you all in a month. Any comments down below? Show some love with a thumbs up, and we'll see you next month.